Hello, Reid. Good evening. Hello.
Good evening.
I think everybody's dropping in, so we can start already. Just do a slight introduction, and then I'll just hand it over to you, so you can present your topic for today. Thanks for that. As always, just a couple of words for starters. The meeting today is going to be recorded, so you have the chance to rewatch the recording afterwards and see all of our previous sessions that we had. We have a look at the sessions and the recordings that we did so far, and you can join us on our meetup group on LinkedIn. You can send us a message on Twitter, and also join our YouTube channel. Feel free to subscribe. I'm gonna post the links to this in the chat when we are starting. Who are we? The hosts for this is Augustine and me, Christian. What we are trying to do with this meeting is bringing the best speakers and bringing a lot of knowledge to you every week on a weekly basis. I see some familiar faces, or I guess better to say I read some familiar names, and glad that you joined, so you might know us already. If not, feel free to join us and add us on LinkedIn, write a message, let us know feedback for the sessions, how you liked it, or any topics that you want to see in the future. Besides this weekly sessions that we have on Wednesdays, Augustine started a new session with Nicola on Tuesdays once a month. So the next one you can see is on the 8th of March. With Phil Seamark. It's a little bit of a different format, but definitely also worth checking out and very interesting. So don't miss that, and connect to that if you like to have some more besides the weekly meetings that we do. As for the upcoming events that we're having today, Reid is gonna tell us something about buttons, beyond buttons actually, and then what doesn't meet the eye with the buttons. Then next week we have a learning path to advance your Power BI career with Steve Campbell. The week after, Melissa Coates is giving us some essential actions for governing Power BI, and a week after that we have in-page navigation techniques in Power BI with Foamy. And with that, I'm happy to hand it over to Reid for his presentation. Excited to see your presentation. And as I said in the beginning, I'm going to add the links to our meeting channels in the chat. Reid, if you're saying something, you're still on mute.
Oh, thank you. Yep. Give me just like 30 seconds getting a couple slides up, and then I'm ready to go.
Yes, sure.
Perfect. Okay. And let me go ahead and share my screen. So yeah, my name is Reid Havens. I'm an MVP with Microsoft. I've had the honor of having that designation now for, I have to actually look at my chip stack, 4 years, and I've been in the BI space for nearly about 10 years now. Started back in like Excel and Power Pivot and everything else. So a little background about me. I do run a company called Havens Consulting, which is my own consulting business. Some of you might be familiar with the YouTube channel that I've done. I really enjoy producing that kind of fun content that teaches creative out-of-the-box solutions for, as an example, for the presentation we're doing today, which is on buttons and some really cool design and use cases for them outside of just like bookmark navigators and everything else that will, excuse me, that we'll be going over. But overall, like I definitely have a passion for teaching and also for design. So like that's kind of a specialty that I have leaned into over the years is the aesthetics and design of reporting, just because there's not as many people, I think, who do that within the Power BI space. But yeah, that's kind of a little elevator pitch about myself and some of the stuff we'll be talking about. But with a lot of these things, I really like to make sure that these presentations are demonstration rich. So let me also talk about some of the stuff that we will be reviewing today. So with most of my presentations, I I build them out to be very scalable. Depending on the place that I'm presenting at, I can scale these up to usually 2 hours all the way down to 30 minutes. So here's the things that, given the time that we have, we'll try to cover as many of these as we can. But as you can see, a lot of very cool different techniques and use cases that we can actually do for buttons. I also will provide supplemental material and links later on for videos that you can watch and consume depending on how much we get through, or to review some of the stuff that we've already covered as well. So there will be plenty of good resources and links at the end of the presentation. But overall, this is mostly just going to be demonstration driven rather than slides and presentations. So I'll go ahead and switch out of PowerPoint and actually start going into some of the demos that we have today. Over. Here we are. Okay, so just to start off the journey, I just want to present in front of you a bunch of things that you see out of the page here, and then kind of ask a question at the top of which of these are buttons. I'll even use some slice of selections in here to make some of these change around a little bit. And it is, given the topic, kind of a trick question, but the thing that I'm wanting to allude to is that everything that you see on this page is a button that has been designed and configured in a certain method to get these looks and feels in them. We have like more of the traditional button here at the top, which is simply just something that allows you to be able to navigate and click on and everything. In the button in the upper right hand corner, you have other ones where you can get some more unique animations, where in this case, this is a button that upon hover and click. I see some things in the chat, just making sure people can hear and see the screen, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure. And then we have some more unique versions of buttons in here. Then this one is actually a button that I have turned into a card, and it's a card that actually has a primary and secondary and even third alternative values. So I have utilized a button to actually create a very unique KPI card that actually provides 3 different buttons that will be presented into the card itself for the default, a hover, and then a click. And in this case, it's a variance and a goal, but it can really be any values that you would want to choose to funnel into there. Another one over here, that button is being used in combination to actually create a number with a spark line, a couple of other ones at the bottom that are actually using custom symbols. So this button is basically a radio toggle that I have built out to give it an effect of kind of a sliding switch that you could be able to turn on between 2 different options. This one is using a custom SVG image that also fills in to just the actual shape itself to give a unique button to click there. And then as you can see, we kind of have a little magic button on the lower right that is actually an animation. So many of these different things we're going to walk through kind of and then dissect and build out each one of these. I do want to start from the fundamental perspective just so we can understand the nature of buttons themselves. So let's just start simple with button hover effects. We have some more unique ones at the bottom, but then the top one is kind of the easiest and simplest way to start with buttons. So it helps to give us a fundamental to make sure we are all on the same page when it comes to understanding the design of these. So typically just whenever you make a button in Power BI, you do have a lot of different states that come with them. So, and I mentioned a couple of words where if you have a button on the page, it looks one way. If you hover your mouse over it, it looks another way. And if you click it, a third configuration can be done. And we can observe those. If I come over to here and I open up the options into the button, we have a few different things to configure. We have shapes, rotation, and style. Now style, and by the way, I will mention that for people who've used buttons before, these did get a lot of newer configurations as far as the new format pane goes. So that's why some things look a little bit different today. You also now have a search option to look between any of these, but they did do a reorganization to try to make it align more with other Office products. I'm even still getting used to it a little bit based on some of the design, but we have, to call out the things that I want to mention right now, we have a few different states that are very important. I'll even see if I can scoot you over. There we go. We have the default, which is, as I mentioned, what the button looks like on the page. The on hover is the mouse hover effect, and then on press. And each one of these can be individually configured. And among here, they've now organized it into text, icon, fill, border, shadow, and glow. So you can reconfigure any of these options for a button between any of these states. So they've not only actually upgraded quite a few of the button features in the last 6 months, shadow and glow are new. to especially to be able to change between states and everything else. But it allows a wide sandbox of configurations to tweak and customize it and design it. At the simplest level, what I have done is for the fill, just take an observation of the color, the default, then the hover gets a little bit darker, and then on press gets even darker. A couple of other things that I'll just mention. If you ever see one of these symbols, that does mean that you can actually set some kind of a rule. So it's not just a static color. You could actually set conditions for ranges or rules to based on KPIs and other things. You can actually have it go from greens to reds. So there's a lot of even further ways to harvest data from your model, maybe based on some type of a metric or a goal, to even further configure this, which maybe we'll discuss later. But I always like to mention that symbol for people who are not familiar with what it might do. That just means that the color that's associated to it can be made a bit more dynamic as needed. But at a very simple level, it gives a color indicator of a kind of interaction, which is the hover effect, and then that click, which will then allow you to interact with it. And I encourage people usually to do something with a button to this regard, because certainly for new people exploring a report, if you're moving your mouse over and you see something like that where it changes color as your mouse moves over it, that's a strong indicator that someone can click it. So it just helps to guide the users to an effect. And that's just the most basic rudimentary understanding of the state that we wanted to talk about. And now that we've considered that, I'm going to move these over here, select this. Actually, I'll do this one first. There we are. All right. Now we can get a little bit more fancy with our buttons as well. So I have on the page like two versions of this, but what you essentially can do with these is you can use these as page navigators, other things to create really unique buttons to create active and inactive effects. Similarly, that's what I've done with this, is the two buttons here. And actually, let me go ahead and snap to grid. Snap to grid, by the way, is a really easy way to make sure that things are pixel aligned and that they rest perfectly on top of each other. But when you are toggling between these, especially if you want to do active and inactive, like if you're switching between pages, you'll usually have two versions of the button sitting in a certain location to indicate whether or not it could be clicked to go to this button action, or it has already been clicked. And unfortunately, there's not a way to configure a single visual to do that typically. So you would usually end up stacking them depending on the configuration you do. And we'll have a setup of this a little bit later on. But normally then you can also, between the two of them, which will be these two, that's where you can actually choose to have one or the other visible or not visible, depending on what bookmark configuration you'll have. So it's a little bit of a hint of the one of the demos we'll be doing next, but that's the reason that I'm demoing right now from a button design perspective, an active and inactive button that's on the page. So now let's actually look at this one and see how it's able to do this. So again, many configuration options are available for these. So this one right now, the default state under style, if we look at the text for inactive, we can see that padding is 4 at the top, 8 over on the left. Now if I hover, you see that the text is moving. So if we actually change this to on hover, I have actually increased the padding to 20. So that's one thing. I've actually moved the text over. So it's scooting it over, and it's doing that because it is making room for a visual that is going behind it, like a little indicator that, hey, this is something that can be clicked. So now that we're on the hover section, let's actually take a look at the icon. Now notice, by the way, we have a few options in here. We have blank left arrow, all of these ones which are the buttons, which are the icons that have been available for quite a while in Power BI. But with the recent updates to buttons, they did actually recently add an option for custom. And that, if I expand, there we go. I actually have an SVG that is in here that is expanding this out. So let me go ahead and open up a PowerPoint document that I made this in. You can actually make SVGs in PowerPoint, and I want to show you that. So give me one sec to put up my files, SVG button icons. Give me a sec. The shortcuts are not working. All right, well, it'll probably be at this rate faster for me to open a new one. So I'm just going to do this. So essentially what I have done, and I'll give you, and actually, because I couldn't find the file very quickly, but I will reproduce super fast what I actually had made. Here we go. So essentially, this. You can see my PowerPoint. So that, minimize that, here we go. So that's essentially what I created in PowerPoint. Because when you add a custom icon in Power BI, what it expects that icon to be as a shape, size, and ratio, it expects it to be a square. So the issue is if I just was to right click on this bar, because you can actually save shapes in PowerPoint, you can do save as picture, and take a careful consideration, notice that I can save it as an SVG. So if I did that, and if I save this as is, the issue would be it would take this bar here and it would try to stretch it into a 4:3 shape. So the ratio wouldn't look good and it would be stretched out. Because again, for most icons, typically they are a square shape to be rendered inside of Power BI. So the trick to that is what I did. I basically placed this over on approximately over on the left. I took two of these, and in this case, I actually would want to get rid of that outline, say no outline there. I grouped both of them together. There we are. And then I saved this as an SVG. So what it has done is it has taken an empty container, which is that larger circle. That now becomes the frame for the SVG, but the only actual image that loads or like has any color is going to be the smaller object inside of it, but it still loads as a vector graphic. And the reason I'm also doing this as a vector graphic, by the way, is SVGs are rendered by the app. So at any scale or any size, it's going to be clear. It's not going to get blurry. It doesn't get pixelated because it is being rendered, for basically for whatever the line paths are. So it will always look good at any scale or resolution. But that's the trick that I got to do this. And the kind of one of the little aha moments, if I can, here we go. So technically, the icon is about this big, but the text is actually sitting on top of it. So I want to show you another setting that I've used to ensure that that ratio that I wanted to get works out well. Because the problem is, if I just had the text sit to the right of it, the text would be all the way over here as the starting point. So let me show you the configuration to get this. Select this here. Actually, I'll use the active button for that. There we go. So the text padding is over here, but if we take a look at the icon, we have an option for custom, and there we go. Actually, and this is, give me one sec. And see, this is one of those new things where as an MVP, I'm actually probably going to submit a bug ticket, because there used to be an option in the old format pane where it's it's like in the Word where you have an interaction with the image and the text, and you can choose on top, right, or left align. And it actually removed itself here. This is the second bug that I found in the format pane that Microsoft has released. So I'm going to take a quick little note for that. All right. Image fit option. You would think by the time they released this out of preview, they would get rid of all of these. But that used to be one of the choices. Is I basically had an option to choose: does the text here, does it overlap the button, or does it sit to the right of the button? And I chose overlap because then essentially what I'm able to do, and I might actually see if I can close PowerPoint and turn off the new format pane, and I'll reload this file to make it easier to see. And then the distance from the bar to the text is controlled by my padding. But let me actually try that. I'm going to, and for those of you who might not want to use the new format pane, this is a good practice and actually seeing where you can turn this off. So I believe that this should be in auto visual header, default interaction, search for filters pane. I see Krillin on the call. I can't remember if you actually can remember where that. Here it is, new format pane. Excellent. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to reboot Power BI, and I will show you where the thing used to be. Still, I feel like has little kinks in the new one. So, all right, we're just going to reopen that file, and I will show you the original setting. Excellent. Sometimes old is better. New is not always better. Okay, let's do this one more time. All right. Old and familiar, that's nice. Here you go. This is would be one, and they got rid of icon placement. So I don't know why they got rid of that, but as I said, I'm gonna go file a bug and make sure that, like, hey, you forgot a feature, because it's still choosing where you can put all of that, but left of text, there you go. So what it actually does is it takes the icon, it shrinks it down, and it puts it entirely to the left of the text in there. So that custom option, where basically it just sits on top, and then I can configure the icon placement independently itself down here. That's what gives me that freedom, where they basically are overlapping. And then really my configuration of spacing of the text is done with that margin, where I can choose to use this to keep that over. So just because it expects a square shape to be there, and what I really want to do is I wanted a non-square object. So kind of that two clever workarounds. Number one, make a square object with only that bar that is actually visible in PowerPoint, and you've seen you can export that as an SVG. And then number two, very important to choose the custom icon placement. And this is not very different from like how pictures in Microsoft Word can be rendered, where you click one wrong button or you do one wrong type and it breaks everything in the Word document. Similar to here with all of these, but like it gives you an idea of like, otherwise where the icon could be. But apparently that is missing out of the new one. So before I want to show you the image down here, though, are there any questions either on the principles of the different state that I showed, or kind of how to get more of a unique button, an icon into here to create some unique hover effects?
Reid, this is Kirill. I have a quick question.
Sure.
So when you do the hover state, do you think it's a good practice to also increase the font of the of the verbiage or not in your experience?
I'd say it could be a personal practice. I try to avoid anything that goes in and out, because to me that leans towards like pseudo 3D effects. It makes it similar to like having a button. In this case, I used to actually do a on press where I would do that, so it would make it look like I clicked it, but it's like I feel like just as an industry, people have started to shy away from anything that looks 3DS or has some features that go towards that. But like bolding possibly could be something where
Sure.
what he's mentioning is you could do and sadly they still don't actually bold, but you could do like that. You could change the font or something else, but as long as it has something that is a strong enough indicator to show that like it's interactive, like that's the most important part. It doesn't really matter what it is. As long as you have one or more visual indicators, I think that should cover your bases. Good question.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
No problem. This one I actually got inspired to do because I was watching How to Power BI, which is a YouTube channel that I would say enviously is like a year has rocketed to like 33,000 people. Somebody is not on mute, and there's a lot of traffic. Okay. But yeah, and he did something similar to this, but what he actually did is he made it with two different objects. He had a thing that would toggle the visibility between an object and the background. Somebody keeps having traffic that pops up onto the the call. If somebody can mute themselves. All right. But yeah, and I was able to figure out what kind of a way to do it in one. I will say that I'll actually just drop a link in there quickly for this. Just because it is a good YouTube channel. They also did take I would say a very Googleable YouTube channel name, which is How to Power BI. But yeah, I do want to give you a link to somebody who I'll say that has done buttons that have actually been cooler than even some of the stuff that I've done. A little envious of both his subscriber count and then the number of things he's managed to do only in about the last 14 months. There he is. Okay. Sometimes it's hard to search for him because if you search for How to Power BI, so many other tutorials come up as part of the channel. But here's
you still can see your Power BI screen.
Yeah. I had my links on the other page. I didn't want to put it up yet, but this is the channel that I was referring to. He did menu icons. Yeah, that was the one that he actually, it was this specific video that inspired me to do this one, because he did something similar to what I did, but with 2 objects. And I actually want to pause and mention the reason that like more objects in the page can be bad. Like you can layer your Power BI report for days, like have objects and text boxes and background things. But the problem is things are rendered singularly in web browsers. They're single threaded. So every visual object frame loads one at a time. And even if you have the fastest model in the world, if you have so many extra shapes and images and text boxes and even things that don't even have data in them, it still might take a couple milliseconds to load each. So generally, as an optimization practice, you want as few unique objects on the page as possible to accomplish your needs. Whether or not that is grouping your objects and adding a background rather than adding a separate background onto the page, or anything that you can do just to consolidate those. So as soon as I saw, him doing the little menu icons and everything else, where I get an example of, I could actually get it all the way to close to, I think where, yeah, see, there you go. Like, and this is the other one that I'm about to show you. He was doing this, but it was each button here was 2 different objects. Like, oh, that's a really cool idea. I like it. But you're also using 2 objects. And wait, we just added a new feature where you can put a custom icon directly into the files. Like, all right, let's see if I can figure out how to do this. So I gave him a nod in my video, but I, got inspired from figuring out how can I optimize this to make it a little bit faster. So that's why I ended up, with the custom icons built into that, and just the consolidation. So like that's just a note from me to you, that just be careful on adding like too much aesthetics, especially if it's unique objects where you're just constantly spamming onto the page, all these, shapes to make it into certain things. It might look pretty, but you're going to slow your report down. So just be considerate of your text boxes, buttons, shapes, and images, because they still do slow down the load time of a report page when it loads up in the browser. All right. Oh, yeah. And the only other thing I wanted to mention here is that the way that I'm able to get that darker color, I do want to just mention the names in here. Hover, you can notice that it is vertical line light, press, vertical line dark, that is in there. So I basically just had 2 versions of that SVG that I rendered, one with a lighter color, one with a darker color. That's how I'm able to get that click effect. It's the same location and everything else, but it's just a darker version of it to give that click effect in there. And then I'm also darkening the background a little bit, but that's the clicked achievement in there. And then the last one down here at the bottom, similarly, what I did is on this one, the default state, standard text, I'm also rendering in SVG. One thing that I have found that's a bit of a glitch in Power BI, annoyingly, is so this SVG that I have, it was downloaded off of a site that just provides icons. If you're curious at all, I can actually type it in. That's where I get a lot of the icons for my thumbnails and everything else, but it's a great resource. But they provide really good quality images. Those images do not actually have these lines in here. This is a rendering issue that Power BI still has. It is a bug that I reported, but those little faint lines are somehow still being displayed. The image itself is a square, but the borders have 0 objects in them. But somehow it's rendering these faint little lines around the borders of where the icon would be. So I do hope someday this does go away, but it's something I've only noticed with SVGs. It hasn't really been as much of an issue with PNGs that have a transparent background. So I would consider it a glitch or a bug in the tool, but they should not be there. It should be rendering perfectly clean with the background color. But essentially, I've gone from, I use I downloaded 2 versions of it, and this is one reason I like flat icon is if you go to search for any specific icon on that site, see if I can actually get this to show up. I want to give you a good example of why I like it so much. Let's see, analytics. Oh, yes, perfect. This is the exact one that I used. This is why I liked it, is you can get 2 versions. I can get one that is the same icon, and then I can get a colored version of it. So most of the icons that they have usually have a few versions of it, as you've seen here, which gives for a great use case of icons for buttons where I can have a regular one, and then when I click it, it becomes active like that. So I flipped the colors, as you'll notice. The text became white, background color became black. So it's a nice, clear click effect. And then when the button becomes active on whatever current page that is, then we get one where the color is permanently on and anchored onto here. So when I did this one, that allowed me to then use the icons from that site that basically parallel each other. I don't have to go in and color them myself. I could just access a great resource library from those and then create an effect like this. Now, you might also be thinking that for page navigation, there is a new button type in Power BI that actually lets you automatically make a page navigator. So in this example, it does actually create a list. Oops. I've made a big one. There we go. Let me actually, I'll flip this for a sec. There we go. Rotation pages. Here it is. That's what I want to do. Vertical. Okay. Yep. So it actually can create a single object that does actually navigate between all of your pages in here. The issue that this has, though, unlike some of the ones that I'm showing you, because I want to play devil's advocate, is I can't configure these nearly as much. So I actually can't add custom icons into this and create some of these more unique effects. So it is easier to set up initially if you were to make something like this and just use this for quick and easy navigation between your pages. And there's some other effects that you can apply to that. I'm eventually going to build out some demonstrations on this as well. But the limitations is the fact that, as you'll notice over here, you have fill, outline, and text and shape. There is no icon option for the navigator. So hopefully that's a feature that comes someday. So it kind of just depends on like your setup process. Do you want more customized and unique, or do you want something that is easier to set up? And they both have pros and cons in their implementation. But the biggest limitation in my mind today is the fact that icons cannot be used in the page navigation at the moment. All right, before I talk about another example, are there any questions that we have so far and anything that I just finished showing you related to like the SVGs? All right, let me go ahead and spin up the next page here. Give me one sec. Okay. So next one here that I want to discuss. Little button up here in the corner allows us to kind of be a binary toggle between two report elements. So this actually came out from a client scenario where they wanted a little radio toggle, and they actually had seen this on a website. So of course, looking at the object initially, like, all right, my first thought is, okay, that looks like an image. All right, can I use things in Power BI to create this? Like, is there, better said, like, can I make this in Photoshop? Can I make this in PowerPoint? But again, like the one thing that I'll also advise about is when you start making custom images, you do also then you're beholden to now using another tool to integrate them in. So if possible, I wanted to see, hey, is there a way for me to configure one of these buttons to actually do this all from out of the box solutions without needing to resort to having to do an SVG image or anything else that would, just add some overhead or somebody else to manage that. So let me actually zoom in a little bit. Here we go. So again, the trick with this, and this is actually an example of the visibility that I mentioned for active and inactive buttons. You've seen all of those effects on these other pages. Actually, just to make sure, I'm always paranoid about accidentally saving my current version of the file. So there we go, just so I don't mess it up. I'm going to move these beautiful bad boys over here. But let me show you with the selection pane what I mean about visibility. So observation over here. There we go. Open all these up. So notice, by the way, right now, column button is hidden, area button is showing because right now my area chart is visible. And it basically is, I have bookmark A, and then I have bookmark B, the two things that are into this section. So at the moment, my area chart is visible. Now watch what happens when I click column visible. The visibility of here changes. These become active. This becomes inactive. So the other button shows up. I'll do this zoomed out so you can observe it. So you can see the two different buttons that are basically hiding or not hiding, depending on which one I have selected. So that's what I mean when I have two versions of them, because they have to start from the opposite default states, essentially. Similar to, in this case, right to left and left to right, depending on which one of these is selected. So that way it looks like I clicked the button and it ended at the new location that I've slid it over to. And the other equivalent of that is active versus inactive. So if I was to click a button like this, and this one was sitting on top of it, the end effect of that bookmark would be activate this bookmark, hide this button, and then, you know, make this button sitting here become visible. So that's how you get those extra effects. I'm hoping one day that Power BI will add additional features to a button to determine. I would love it if it could look at the bookmark assigned to it. And by assigned, I mean this. It would be great for it to determine if there is a bookmark assigned to this, identify that, and then have it a configuration for an additional state. It would be, you know, default on hover, press active bookmark. If there was an active bookmark state that could also be enabled, then that means that that fourth state, which is the default, hover, click, and then state number 4 is bookmark is now active that is assigned to this, you know, all those other configurations, then I would never have to do these toggles or visibilities. So like that's my dream someday, that they somehow are able to, and I think they can do this. They can identify what is the active bookmark on the page, and then toggle to the, you know, add a fourth configuration visually for a button. Because they, you know, I would immediately, like if I had 5 of these on my page, that's technically 10 objects that are on the page that I have to configure and update. I've now cut that down to 5. And as a quick mention for performance, I did mention before that for performance issues, the more objects you have on the page, the slower the performance is. That really is primarily related to objects that are visible on your page. So if I was to show and hide this, what it does is it actually takes the time and the processing power to render it when I unhide it. Similar with a visual. If I have a bunch of visuals on the page that have data, as an example here, my model's not big enough to do so, but if I had a really large model and I click this, you might see a spinning wheel for like a second or two as it actually runs a query, loads the data, loads the container. So there is processing time and load time that is done to make it visible. So the performance really is only dictated by objects visible on the page. You might have a maintenance cost if you have a bunch of other things in the background that are all hidden, but it's not actually going to affect performance until they become visible. So that there's one additional consideration to keep in mind when you're going through this. But let's actually see how we can configure one of these right now. All right, so I'm going to close you out. There we go. Actually, no, that's fine. So for the button here, a couple of things that I want to mention. Shape, there we go. So important thing that I've done is that I've actually gone from a square to kind of more of a pill shape. And now, this was something that they've updated recently. They used to really only have a rectangle, and you had a choice of rounded edges, 0, or, you know, in this case, I did 20. They've updated this to add a ton of other shapes you have available now between all of these. Some really cool ones to have some additional features, lots of different shapes that you can actually turn your buttons into. But the rounded edges are the important part. So like that's actually what I've done to have it go from more of a traditional button to something that looks more of like, you know, the radio toggles you might see on phones or, you know, apps or other stuff like that. And the rounded edges is what comes into play for that. And this can also be configured actually on the different states. Like you can actually have, you know, different roundings depending on, you know, which state you're configuring. So there are many ways to customize this between your various states. Obviously in this one, I don't actually need to change it, but I do like just to mention that as part of the art of possible. But the shape we discussed now, a couple of other things that I want to point out. Really, what I've done is with the colors. Color is a great way to just indicate change. So I've gone from a blue to a gray, which is essentially just neutral, you know, non-existent color, to a purple. Colors are really the colors that I chose are less important. Is more of I wanted a transitionary, you know, movement between the two sides when it came to the colors in there. Now the trick that I liked in this one, go to text. I need to zoom out for this, but there's a wonderful keyboard shortcut in Power BI. If I hold the Windows key and I do either period or colon, I get something called the emoji keyboard. And unfortunately, Zoom doesn't like the emoji keyboard very well. at least from my perspective, I get 2 windows, but we have something where I can type in, I want a circle. I'm going to type in the word circle. Notice that that word is actually showing up right there, and it shows me everything related to a circle. So I ended up, instead of using like an ASCII symbol, because I could have looked up like the little black circle to put into there, but I really like the fact that at least for the Windows emoji library, it had a circle that has a bit of a text outline, a black outline on it. So it renders kind of in a nice color, and it actually loads the slider button that I want. And pay attention to the alignment. So I have right aligned default. Hover is in the middle, and press is over on the left. So 1, 2, 3. So that's how I'm able to get that little slider effect back and forth. It, like, you know, fast enough, it looks like an animation between the 2 sides. It's not fluid as much as you can get with HTML, but it's darn near close enough for a lot of the effects that you want to get from that. A couple of other considerations that I want to mention onto here, though. So the library that this is rendering under is the Windows library. So most of these emojis are shared across all devices. This will render on a phone. This will render on a Linux machine, Android, Mac OS, etc. But their libraries look a little bit different. Windows is the Windows emojis are a bit flatter, and then they have kind of a thick outline to most of their stuff. That's how Microsoft has rendered their library. Apple has a bit more of a pseudo 3D effect in shading and shadows. So this circle, there is a white circle in all of the emoji libraries, but it does look a little bit different. There's a bit of a shade or a shadow when this is rendered on Mac versus desktop. So just be aware of what devices these are being consumed from. It's typically, I feel, for most clients, it's primarily usually going to be over 50% Windows, but then Mac's going to be second, and so just know the audience, know the what it's going to be consumed on, and then if possible, do a quick check to to load the report page and some of the other ones and make sure that how it looks is still acceptable for whatever standards you might have for design or aesthetics for the organization, and that it's loading correctly. That's the one downside of using a rich colored emoji versus, as I mentioned, possibly using a static image and building that out in PowerPoint or something else. But you can see how customized you can turn these buttons into when it comes to some of the effects and other unique things you can make out of it, rather than just a button that says click me to do this thing. So very unique solutions for that. And I was happy that I was able to do this entirely with out-of-the-box solutions, not requiring any custom development, and using any of these features where you can do the custom icons. The other thing that we haven't gotten into yet that we'll see as soon as part of the fill, there we go, you do have an option to add an image in there as well, which we'll see further down. So any other questions on this? And can somebody give me a sanity check on when is around what time do you guys typically wrap up the presentation portion, just so I make sure that I don't run over anything?
We have time actually until 7, so or 45 more minutes. So
okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I have plenty to cover. So I would say once we get close, just give me like a 5-minute reminder.
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, let's go back to this. And where is yes, here we go. So another use case for buttons that I really like. They are wonderful also as KPI cards. So with a lot of these scenarios that I will be demonstrating, I'm giving you examples of things that can be built out where you can use buttons for more than just typical button configurations. In this case, a client came to me and they already had like a team that was basically designing everything for me out of the box, and they're just like, all right, well, we want you to build the model to make this. We already know how we want it to look. You just need to go build an enterprise model to fit into this. And 6 months later, a complicated model, and then I needed to figure out how to make these in Power BI, because they had made this with Spark View, and a few of the other visualization platforms. Or sorry, this was a .NET report, and they had made that in .NET. So like, how do I make this in Power BI? Well, we don't only have a visual that has like a KPI bar that's in here that does this, but I can play around with some stuff and see what I can do to create this. So spent some time trying to figure out what to do and everything. And my first version out the door was this one. So kind of looks pretty similar. You know, the bar's a little bit of a different size, but I can obviously adjust that. So I started out with this. Let's see, click. There we go. All right. I'm gonna go over. Okay. So we're gonna ungroup you. There we go. So that was the first person that I made. I did a bit of layering. You know, I had them like stacked here like this. And with, again, the snap to grid, that's a huge lifesaver because then I don't have to worry about pixels. I can just snap it. I can snap it and then something like that. And like now they are snapped pixel perfect to each other. I know that their widths, heights, and everything are fully aligned. So like that's one reason I really like that tool. Worst case, what I might need to do is I'll turn that off. I can select this. I can move that up to make it a little bit thinner just using the arrow keys on my keyboard. But that's how I'm able to group and get those so pixel perfect so easily, rather than having to go, you know, old school, go to general, adjust all of the positions that are over here. Like I haven't touched these in years. A combination of turning snap to grid on, putting them where they are, turning it back off temporarily to scoot it up a few pixels, and then from there, now I can still snap the whole object around and they stay perfectly async with each other. That's the easiest shortcut for me to get like pixel perfect reports. You know, with very little headache. But as you might possibly be assuming, I have three objects that I'm having to render for this one thing. The top object is a single value card. I'm just using one of those here to render that onto the page. And then I have in the middle, I have a button. And I'm not doing anything on this other than I have a measure that is being supplied into the fill color. A pretty simple calculation too. KPI colors. I'm just going to show you what that measure is. It's more important about how to implement this. I cannot type today. There you go. I basically have two variables declared for two hex colors, green and red, and there's simply just a comparison. If this is greater than or equal to 0, turn green, otherwise return red. That's it. And that's how it's able to go from red to green depending on any of my slice of selections. So that was my first use of a button is, you know, it's just a container. I could have used a text box. Technically, they're interchangeable in terms of that, or maybe even a shape nowadays. The reason I don't like text boxes as containers for like color is it always has this. There's no way for me to get rid of this thing. So as I'm developing out and I'm shrinking this down, this just gets in the way of stuff. Like it's like an annoying little pop-up that refuses to go away. So like that's a reason that I avoid text boxes as anything but containers to actually hold text versus a button, which they both render in about the same speed, but at least a button does not have any of those annoying pop-ups. So that's the reason that I use that as kind of an empty vessel if I'm wanting to use it for design or a background shape or anything else in Power BI. Like that's my one primary consideration. Otherwise, I could have done the same thing technically. I could have used the background color in a text box, and I also could have applied the measure into there. But as soon as I finished building this, you know, I had a single value card at the top, button in the middle. The reason, by the way, that these are rendering on top is the fact that I have them in a proper order. So the line is at the very bottom. So these are both on top of it. And then a very important configuration with objects is you always want to make sure, in general, that this is turned on. As long as maintain layer order, which again was a feature that was added I think it was last year, within the last year or two. What that means is that like right now in desktop, if I click this, it kind of pops up. It becomes active and in front. Once you publish this, if maintain layer order is turned on, then the layers that are in this group are maintained. So even if I continue to click this, it might highlight it or like frame it, but it still stays in the background. It does not show up in front of other visuals. So any illusion that you have or anything else that might have otherwise broken in the past, like there are situations where you could do this. If you had a framed object to frame a bunch of other things onto the page, clicking it like this for the end user, if they clicked it twice, once to click into the group, another time to click the object, it would pop up like this and it would look like you just broke the report page. So that maintain layer order was an addition that they brought in to make sure that that will never happen once you publish it to the service. So that's how I was able to get that thin line with 2 single value cards that I have onto the page. But I'm like, all right, if I have 5 of these cards, 5 times 3, that is 15 different visuals that I have on the page to render these cards, and that's going to slow down my report a lot. Not on top of anything else. So I want to see how I can optimize this a little bit. In any way consolidated. So that's actually what I'm doing in between the 2 of these here, and I'm realizing these are actually slightly different heights. Give me 1 sec. So let's go ahead and dissect. Click, click. There we go. Dissect this one. Excellent. All right. Ungroup you. So now I just have 2 report. I just have 2 objects. Up here is a button. And as well, down here is a single value card. So let's actually dissect this. Take an observation right here, by the way. Look at what the title is. The title is 1664. So let's see what happens when I change it. So notice that the title is now 921. The title up here is 921. So I have a dynamic title actually in this card. So that's actually the trick that I was able to do is in here, what normally would just be, title, I'm actually supplying. There we go. I'm actually using a measure to supply the title into here and render that. So if I click on this and take a look, we can see the completed amount text is what's being used. So let's look in here. Here we are. So what I'm actually doing is I'm using the format function, which converts anything in with DAX to a scalar output that takes the original value and then formats it and converts it to text. That's how I'm able to put it into the title because titles can be dynamic, but it requires the output to be of the measure that you're asking. It has to be text. If I try to do anything else that's not text, let's just take a look at some other ones. See, it won't let me click it, but I'm able to do this one. So anything that has a text as the data type for the measure itself can be funneled into here. So it looks and smells like a number, but it is in fact a text value being returned into that. But so the downside is I have an extra measure in my model, but that's a small cost. That can be hidden or organized in a way just to make sure that it doesn't clutter the model up. It's going to render just the same. The amount of time for it to convert from a data type to another versus actually calculating the number is minuscule. Like there's basically 0 cost for it to just to flip 921 into a formatted 921. As far as any performance hindrances this might have. But the upside is now I've taken 2 objects and I've turned it into 1. I still have the same background color. So the body of the button is still this little piece down here at the bottom. So that is still the fill option. And that same logic is just being ran where that hex color is returning one of those 2. But then just with these 2 stacked and everything on top of each other, that's how I'm able to get the 2 of these combined. Now the bottom one, again, is just a single value card. I've given it a standard title. The completed is just a regular title into there. And then I have a measure that's just concatenating a few values together. And it's not as important what the measure's really returning, but I can just show you for kicks and giggles. And there I just have a couple of things where I have a percentage. I have my target in here, and then a couple of little KPI arrows that I put in with some ASCII symbols. And then basically it's just a concatenation of all of these. So checking to see whether or not it's actually going up or down. And it gives me a nice little printout of some insights and analytics into there. But all of this information combined in 2 objects and grouped together creates this unique card that is utilizing both a button, some formatting for the background, a dynamic title, and then some formatted DAX to create a nice little information card that is not something that you would see with any of the native visuals. But it shows you some unique ways to utilize the button for nothing related to actions at all. But it's a good container, in this case, to actually provide some KPIs. So are there any questions kind of on the design or optimization on this one? No questions on this. I'll go ahead and show you the next one as well. So similar concept. Glad to hear it. And like I said, I'll have plenty of videos to walk through some of this. But I love that this was a YouTube comment. So somebody I think had watched, I believe they watched this video like, oh, this is awesome. You know, it'd be really cool is if you could have a button where you can hover over, you get an alternative value. I'm like, well, that's, yeah, you can totally do that. You can, you can utilize that option in here, able to pop that up. And if you wanted to be really clear about it, by the way, again, I actually used the emoji library to put the little symbol into here, but you could even do something where maybe you put like an eye in there to possibly like indicate that they could like hover over it. There's other ways you can provide hints that like this might be something you could access, but as soon as they do that, like, oh, there's an 84. If I think the hover effect, that's probably what I would use the most. It's less intuitive that they would also click on it to get a third value, but that click state can be accessed. So my encouragement to use, if you wanted to use something like this, ask yourself what kind of users are accessing the report. If you have like 30 people who are the only individuals who will ever look at this, it's easy enough to provide documentation, maybe a short video, some way to explain how to use the report. If you have lots of churn where this is on a publicly facing website and you have tons of new people looking at the report on a daily basis, to me, again, that click one isn't super intuitive. So it might be a little harder to educate people on that, or you might need to be clearer based on the title, or maybe a tooltip pop up somewhere in here that indicates people what can be done so they can understand that, oh, if I click, I get a third value. But that's all configured in the text field here. You see the default state, a measure is being supplied into there, and I have 3 different measures for my default, my hover, and my press. So this one is completed amount variation, and on press, well, then the open goal text. And this time I also chose to use the background color as the actual thing, the change between those. So many different parts of this can be configured with conditional formatting, I believe. I didn't actually even use the fill. Yeah, I used the background on this one. The difference, by the way, if you're wondering like what's the difference between fill and background, so fill will only fill up the shape. If I have a different shape and I have my fill turned on, I get those rounded edges. Like essentially that's how I'm able to get this. The fill would do that. If I actually, on this object, if I turned on the background color, it would fill the square. So that's the number one difference, because I've had a few people ask me what's the difference between fill and background color, and that is the number one. Is fill only fills the color into the shape object, background fills it into the container. And in this case, since I don't have any shapes, that's where I chose to do the background. But same measure that's being supplied on the other page, but in this case it's just filling up the whole object. But between the 3 of those, you can again kind of consolidate your cards. I'd love maybe someday to possibly have like a card where I can have and what I'm mentioning here, by the way, is in a single value card. I'd love that there is more of a print. I don't want multi-row, because that is an option I can do here as well. I would like to be able to just put 2 values into here and just have listed like one after the other, just like multiple lines. So a pipe dream that I'd have someday for that. But in the meantime, I can have a single object and have 3 different KPIs inside of there. So it cleans up the space that I have onto the page and allows me to provide multiple different variances and cuts into there. The last thing that I'll just mention maybe as a hint indicator is one other thing you could do is if you had the visual header turned on for this, you could come down and turn on the tooltip, which will give you this little icon. And then even further, you could add this has hover plus click effects, click, like that. And then when you publish it, you could give them a little indicator to actually say like what they could do with this to help guide users as needed. I really do wish I could actually resize these. I would love to be able to make this bigger. Like, oh, I want this to be like the size of the text in here, but from what I could tell on a lot of this is, even if I increase this, yeah, see, it makes that bigger. It doesn't make the icon bigger, and I've not found any way to actually increase the icon size. Many features when I spend 8 hours a day with the tool that I would love to push back, but someday maybe I can adjust that. But it at least gives you one option to play around with, to explore how to help the user guidance. But overall, any questions on kind of any of the mechanics behind the alt values between the default, hover, and press state. Okay, let's do last but not least then with this section. The last one here, go ahead and ungroup this. This is one that I've been using for years with Power BI. So we have a button, we have a little spark line. It's on top of it. I built that into my Google Analytics report and a few others. The goal with this is, in general, just you have limited space in Power BI, and as much as I can, I want to compact things down to get them to display information, but in a small form. Now, technically, with the sparkline, there are ways to add target values, and you can even display like the category label or other things like that. I wanted it to be displayed above, and there was also just annoyances that I had with how much white space was being given up. So I couldn't get it to be as compact as I wanted it to be with any of the custom visuals or anything else. Like, all right, well, in this case, how do I layer these together? Obviously, we just have the sparkline, which it's pretty straightforward. All I have is I have an axis, I have an amount. The only real thing that is required for this configuration is the fact that I just have my background turned off, which is allowing for that transparency. But the reason that I'm actually using a card here versus, as an example, a text box, or sorry, versus a single value card. Here's my annoyance with the single value card. And I really wish that it had a few more options to configure. So I'm just going to put this here. I'm going to put an amount in here. There we go. So without label on, this number that's in here, I have no options to configure its location. Like I can bold and italic, like cool. For the first time they actually added, this is like one of the few things that they've recently updated to the card in probably 3 years. It's mostly remained unchanged, but there is no alignment option. If I look for a line, I can do the title, but I can't choose top, bottom, left, right. Like there's no way for me to put the number at any other location other than front and center. And the problem, if I wanted to layer, there we go. If I wanted to layer this, clearly I don't have much room on the bottom, and I have all this white space at the top. And so if I wanted to do something like this, well, now I would have to figure out other options in here. I could turn the background color on for this one, but now it's clearly they don't fit well together as puzzle pieces, especially with the borders and all that. Like maybe I could add a third object behind them to create the frame and everything, but now I'm adding more objects. So the card, this magical button, has text options that I just really wish would come out to the single value card. I can choose my vertical alignment placement. I can choose top, middle, bottom, which is exactly what I did. I just moved it up. I also have left and right. These are like simple things like why does the button have this but not the single value card? I can choose my margins, to determine how much I want it to sit to the left or the right. Like there's so many ways for me to configure everything in here and to choose padding and all that other stuff. So it kind of it's mind-boggling that none of those have come out to the card yet. But that's why I've used buttons for so many different things besides visuals. Is in many ways it is a better card than the native Power BI card is. So I've utilized it in plenty of circumstances to create those perfect little examples of often layering and other stuff to utilize it as a visual when a default the default single value card is just not cutting it in that regard. But it's a pretty straightforward example of kind of simple layering, but I think it just gives you another example of I think a missing feature out of a native visual, and then some clever features of utilizing this to layering visuals on top of each other. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's plenty of ways to make new stuff by layering stuff together. Nowadays, I'm starting to move away from layering, and just as a quick mention, there are a couple of tools out there that actually let you build custom visuals. One of them is built by a good friend of mine, Daniel Marsh-Patrick out of New Zealand. He's built a custom visual maker in Power BI that, there we go. Yeah, it actually lets you build script set, and you can basically generate all sorts of really cool custom visuals. So this is one thing that I've been using a bit more when I'm rather than layering is all right, can I can I build a custom visual in this? It's a custom visual inside of Power BI that has its own editor that actually lets you configure and design the custom visual itself using a open source code language called Vega Lite, which is actually built here in Seattle at the University of Washington, but it's a visual language that lets you build out a lot of this cool stuff. So this is one example, and the other one is Charticulator that Microsoft just released. There we are. Another custom visual that lets you build various custom visuals in Power BI. So both of these essentially, now can do a single container for really cool and unique custom visuals to display data in, but you don't have to layer stuff anymore. So if you're ever like kind of exploring wanting to make really cool, unique visuals without having to touch much code, both of these are pretty good examples of something you can. It's quite literally just add. Should pop up here in just a sec. Right there. Come on. Oh, interesting. It didn't actually add it, but I'll just leave it at that then and mention that those are. Oh, there you go. All right, perfect. Yeah, so puts a container onto your page. And basically just asks you to drop some data into there. Let's do that and do a date. And you can go edit. There you go. And it actually lets you build out a whole bunch of stuff. So I won't go into building that because I have an entirely separate presentation on this, but it lets you create a chart from scratch, import a template. I have a couple of videos on my YouTube channel that walk through how to build these. There's a ton of other tutorials like Power BI tips for that, but it's a really cool way to build out bespoke visuals, kind of like almost how you would do it in like Tableau or something else, either from templates or from other resources. And I'll close this conversation just by showing there we go. There's a lot of the chart templates that are available. One of my favorites is actually the bump one. It's a really cool way to kind of show rank over time and placement and how things have actually moved. In this case with I believe, this is a ranked order for carbon dioxide emissions, but as you can see, there's a lot of different templates and really interesting things you can build with Charticulator. Okay. Close this out. There you go. I will have probably like one more demo that I can do. Any other questions on what I've just shown before I move on to the next one? I do see one question in the chat that I'll leave this up and let's see if I can answer that. Do you use any visual standard? Yes, absolutely. Let me bring one of them up. Website that I would. Here it is. I want to bring up both this and the book before I move the thing over. Okay. So as far as standardization for visual goes, I mean, I don't think there is a better one than IBCS. It stands for International Business Communication Standards. It's a person who, a company that built out a standardization of visualizations. The first line in the book equates it to like there are notes for music that everybody understands. Everybody knows that this note means this thing. Why can't we have something like that for visuals, or this type of chart, or this color, or this pattern, like anything in between that? Why can't these all have a standardization and meaning? So it helps to standardize and create a language for visuals, and it's really useful. So I'll drop both of these links in here, but they also have a book, crossed, outlined, and hatched. Let's see if I can have that up. Let me look for the book. Should be on Amazon. Solid outline hatch. There we are. This book. Yep. Called Solid Outline and Hatched. And it is a book that basically is all on the methodology and philosophy of that. It's really, really useful. There are a couple of custom visuals and other stuff that that adhere to these standards and create really cool visualizations and templates related to them. So it's a great resource and something that I'd encourage you reading if you're wanting to get further into visualization and design. But let's see, one example that I just want to show you about what one of their visualizations looks like in Power BI. And maybe I'll actually even just demo this before I open it up to open questions. because this is something that I'm actually pretty passionate about. So let's go to here. And by the way, this is a custom visual in Power BI. If you're not familiar with it, this is it was released just this year. It's InfoRiver. It is a full like analytics platform built into Power BI as an actual custom visual, which is pretty fantastic. Yeah, this is just a visual container sitting onto the page, but it has quick and easy IBCS templates. As one example, there we are. That actually displays your data and variances within it. But one of my favorite things that I wanted to mention, an IBCS bullet, if you've not seen those before, I want to compare my sales and my forecast. I love the goals bullet. So what it actually does is it takes your data and it normalizes it to a goal line. So everything is related to how far a variance is above or below a goal. So even though the numbers are obviously very different, it's not comparing it's not giving the scale and size based off of the raw number. It's giving it based off of what the percentage variance is above and below those. So it allows you to track up and down various goals at different sizes with that. But I mean, as you can see in here, this is a custom visual in Power BI that lets you really quickly and easily throw your data together and visualize it. But the IBCS standard is adhered to both on some of the custom visuals that you can do. And again, the IBCS has 5 different table templates in terms of choosing how to display your data to make it easy to read. And that's the standardization that they've come across. Is like T2 is a template that looks exactly like this with the variance percentage is displayed as a lollipop chart. A variance is displayed as a bar chart. So like, that when you're looking at certain data, it's always going to be consistent. Actuals is always solid. Forecast is a hatched pattern, where plan would be outlined. So it helps to remove the need to interpret the data as you explore and play around with it. So very, very cool tool, and also just the standardization, which they've used is super useful. So that's also something that I'll drop into here. So there you go, drop that into there. Yeah, it's the coolest custom visual that I've ever used. Microsoft actually just did a blog on it, just to show you like how integrated Microsoft is getting. It's one of the few times you'll ever see a custom visual for Microsoft get its own dedicated blog post, because most of the time Power BI does a once a month blog release that mentions all the custom visuals coming out for Power BI, kind of at the very footnote of it. This got a dedicated blog from one of the senior PMs at Microsoft where they actually break it down into this. So Microsoft is building a good relationship with the company that's doing this, just because essentially this is giving you advanced Excel visualization design and everything inside of Power BI that just hasn't previously been available. So I love playing around with the tool. But my main goal for it was just showing you some of the visualization standards that can be represented using this when you're looking at the different things. And I'll just mention the last thing here. The only thing I ever did is I just dropped my sales, prior year plan, and forecast. I didn't calculate any of my variances. Those are things that are auto-generated by the tool itself. So this is something I could spend 3 hours talking about, but I just wanted to give a quick little demo of it to showcase the IBCS portion of it. I do know we're at about 46. I generally like to leave about the last 10 or 15 minutes more for water cooler conversations, general questions about Power BI. So at this point, I'd like to open it up kind of to the floor. Let any of you ask questions for me. If you have anything you want me to show you, I'm happy to do that. But while I let you come off mute and ask any questions, I'm going to also bring up some links and resources as well that I can share with you. All right. The QR code there takes you to my website homepage. There's also a series of links that I'll drop in the chat here in just a minute. And actually, I'll do that right. Do that right now, and then put that back up. There we go. Yep. Sorry. Minimize is what I want to do. And then paste. Okay. It never lets me, as far as I'm aware, there's no option in Teams to paste as plain text. So this is going to be large text. But those are all of the links that are from the PowerPoint deck that are in here. If you wanted to click on those, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel if you like the content you saw today. It helps to support me and help the channel grow. So it's always appreciated when you subscribe to those. For anybody who attends a user group meeting, I do sell a bunch of files and templates on my site, and As a thank you, I just want to give you guys the 30% discount code off of any of that stuff for just hanging out with me today. So that is available to use for the next 30 days on anything that's available related to Power BI off of my site as well. And please feel free to ping me on LinkedIn. I'd love to answer questions and help out people in the community. So if you ever have any questions on Power BI, more than happy to hop onto there and answer those as well. But yeah, I'll leave this up for now. Otherwise, are there like any general questions you wanted to ask related to Power BI or anything else you'd like me to show?
First of all, thanks, Reid, for the presentation. Really, some useful stuff there. I think in the beginning there was a question about slicers and the possibility to basically have I think a slicer pane, if I understood correctly, that I can toggle via a button.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironically, it's like probably still one of my most popular videos. I think it is still the most popular video on my YouTube channel. I don't really use slicer pop-up panes anymore just because there's so much to configure. Let's see if I can find it. Slicer pop out. There it is. 2008. Ooh, man, that was 3 years ago. 3 years ago that I did this. Sometimes time flies. You don't think it was that long ago. But let me drop the link into here. Go. So that. Yeah, it's totally doable. But as you can imagine, like if I have all these slices, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the reset button's 11, title's 12, back button's 13, the shadow is 4. So there's 14 objects that I had to create the slicer window. Like, so it does pop out, it pops in, and I can configure it. I can make it as wide as I want. I do some cool things as well where I actually put a transparent button on the full page. So if you click anywhere outside of it, it does close the window again. So yeah, you can fully configure one yourself to do this. And this video does walk you through how to do that as well. But the downside is it's a huge overhead cost. Every page now has to be maintained. You have to make the bookmark to do that. So I've honestly started relying on the filters pane a lot more. It is not quite as customizable. I understand that, but the performance payoff and just how easy it is to quickly and easily just configure this, because I did that video before this existed. This, if we go back in the time machine, was not always a thing that used to be in Power BI. So I utilize this just because it doesn't have a performance cost. It has a scroll bar that's built into it if you have enough visuals onto the page. So it's just I find it easier to use to solve most of my scenarios. The only times that I build a slices pane is for the times when a customer has a really unique scenario. As one example, if they actually need a date slider, they want something like this, the slicer pane does not quite have that for a configuration. So there are some times when I still build one, but my default nowadays is to use the filters pane unless there's a very specific business scenario that would require me to build out something like this.
Yeah, thanks. I'm pretty sure that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can also unmute yourselves if there's anything that you. Oh, okay.
Get to mute.
Then let me try and do that.
Usually there's like a little meeting setting somewhere that lets you toggle that.
Actually, I can't unmute. So it worked when I muted, but can't unmute for some reason.
That's fun. Let's see.
Maybe.
Oh, interesting. So let's see. I am going to change. Can you make it? I think if you make everyone an attendee, that should allow them to unmute. Anybody who's now an attendee, I believe, should have an option. I'm doing that as well with some of them. So there you go. Because I think it's because they're guests that they probably are not allowed to. And I'll let you finish that. I have a question. So here we go. Do you have a design process briefly? Do you you say check? Do you mean check visuals on a page? Or maybe if you could either explain that a little bit more, or if you have the option to come off of mute. Oh no, yeah, I definitely don't do that. Like as I mentioned, it's a performance issue. If you have a ton of visuals on the page, you're going to hit a performance bottleneck. Which is why I avoid the slicers pop out. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay, we can unmute now. I was just wondering, just usually struggle with like tons of visuals. Which ones do you use? Like which ones are do you just have a rough idea, or you just lay a couple on there and go, oh, this might work, or this might not work, or just thinking of how you can refine and streamline that process a bit, I guess, if you have any tips for that.
See if I can find visuals guide from Power BI. Oh, actually, I might have just, I just found a new article. Cool. I was actually looking up something from SQL BI that they made a visual guide a few years ago, but apparently this is the top Google search for visuals guide, and it actually seems to be pretty good. Excellent. Okay, because yeah, the number one thing that you have to kind of bucket it into is things like this: comparison, data over time, correlation, distribution. Like what's the type of thing that I'm doing, and then from there, like you can see what type of visuals are available both in Power BI or could represent that. And sometimes it is like, all right, let's try this as a bubble chart. Okay, well, it is or doesn't really look good in there. And what is it? Is it clear in a bar chart? So sometimes there is a matter of just swapping it around a bit and trying it out. But this does help to tell the journey and the story with that. And the other one that I wanted to pull up, SQL BI visuals reference. There we go. This is the other one. And they haven't updated it since 2018, which is the fun part. But it still actually is it covers probably 90% of what's out there. And it both of these is meant to like comparison, change over time, ranking, spatial. They actually even provide more than this one. They go into like narrative, filter, single. So granted, like the custom visuals haven't been updated in this list since 2018, but it does at a high level still give you a lot of categories to think about what my data is telling me. So that's usually where I start from. And after a while, your brain starts to like just know, okay, so I'm showing sales, but I'm comparing companies, and the goal of this is performance. Okay, so it's probably ranked. If I'm going to rank them, a stacked or maybe a ribbon chart, because that actually shows changes over time for some of these and like comparisons with each other. So like you eventually start to notice the patterns, and then it does become second nature. But references like this, helps to at least reduce your selection. And then from there, kind of just playing around with the data in Power BI to see how it displays. And, from there, kind of, picking and choosing ones that will best represent the information.
That's great. Thank you. That's a really good overview. I think that was brilliant. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really curious who interested. I've never heard of this company before. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'll actually. As soon as I get off of this, I got to see what this company is doing. Apparently, it's they do very clean, elegant reports. So, yeah, that's cool. I enjoy learning new stuff.
That's great.
Any other questions or anything else that I can? I think most of you should be able to take yourself off mute now.
Well, I mean, I can always check another question in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of your color palette, you tend to not overdo it with too many extreme colors. It's always very visually appealing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to this. This is actually a great example. To avoiding too many colors. I try to usually have it as wide as possible. Colors to call out things like an icon, the charts. I usually use a light color for the background to provide a frame, which still helps to distinguish elements from each other. Because separation is important to have spacing and identifying spacing. But color is something that I is sacred. It should be used sparingly, and it also should be if you're ever using color to indicate anything related to a KPI, generally don't just have the color indicate that. If you have a chart or something else that's using green and red for bad and good. All right, well, from an accessibility perspective, anything else besides that actually tells you that it's bad or good? And if the answer is no, then maybe consider adding an icon or something else to that. To me, a good example, see, I actually just did this recently. It was one of my favorite little things that I made. But yeah, but to your thing, color is important, but it is something that should be used carefully and sparingly. Like this is an example of a. Here we go.
Oh,
yeah.
cool.
So I figured out how to use the stack column chart and some custom DAX to create something that has a call out at the top and the bottom. Now green obviously indicates that like these are the values that I care about, but even regardless of what the color is at the top, you can still understand with an analytics line, like things above this line are more important, things are below. There's ways to indicate otherwise, but yeah, this is one of the more of the fun projects that I have. If you go to my YouTube channel, this is the second or third most recent video that I released recently. So it was a lot of fun, but I ended up, basically I did a stack column chart and I have two values in here that are actually like separate. There is I need to turn on my tooltip, there you go. There's an above and below value plus a total that it's in here. It's one of those things that I don't know why it took them 5 years to add, but they finally added a total label to stack charts. Like I really couldn't have done this before. The problem is now, if I don't turn the total on, sure, I have two values, but then if you actually want to know the total, you have to add A plus B. With this on, it actually adds the label plus, regardless of where I hover, I actually get the total value in the tooltip. So that because that got added, it was finally a chart that I could build and I could say it could be delivered, to a premium or an enterprise level scale. But I think it's just a really great way to kind of call out values, above or below, little dynamic line that you can set based on a bunch of different averages. So I can actually link. This is a small promotion. I will grab my YouTube channel. Here we go. It is. Got all the live stream. There it is, right there. Level up your columns. It's always weird to look at myself every like. I wish these would not autoplay. I don't need to hear my voice any more than I do.
Thank you. That's brilliant, Reid. Thank you so much for that. That's really useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone, thank you.
Sorry?
I was just saying, yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, as we're on the hour, and if there's no more questions, I'd like to say thank you again, Reid, for this really interesting presentation. A lot of stuff that I'll rewatch and probably also use in the future. I can safely say that you have at least one new subscriber after this. So I'll check out your videos. And let me just quickly share my presentation for one last slide. Shared the wrong screen, but that should be all right for now. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel as well to rewatch this video or any of the videos before. And you can tune in next week for our session with Steve Campbell. And yeah, hope to see every one of you there. And thanks for tuning in and then staying with us for the 1.5 hours with great session.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much, Reid. It's a great session. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Yeah.